So we stopped our last, this thing was the question. Parikshit Maharaja's question to Sri Shuka, what should a man who is in the throes of death do? So then we commented on that already. So I won't go into that, but he gives him certain techniques by a man who is about to die, what he should do. He should lift his prana along the chakras and take it up to his chakra, and thus leaving like that, there is no return for such a soul. But after that, we go on to there are many other he things which we really don't have time for that, characteristic features of the Bhagavata and so on. But then we go on to what is in the second chapter, what we known as the Chaduslogi Bhagavata. That is Bhagavatam in a nutshell. And what it was given to Brahma in the beginning. Only Narayana existed. Narayana is one who lies on the cosmic waters. What are these waters? Actually, scientifically, we can say this is the ocean of all possibilities. In science also, we say that's an ocean of all possibilities from which arises everything. This whole world is created from this ocean of all. It's not, said for this had been like this. There are many possible combinations, but permutations we can take depending on our own mental status. So on this, Narayana, the one who sleeps on the cosmic waters, and he is sleeping on what? Not a very nice thing. He's sleeping on a bed of a snake bed. So what is the snake is meant to be? The snake of time. He has time under his control, so he's sleeping on that snake of time. And at that time, he alone existed, alone. Aham kalvamasi, I alone exist. There's nothing else but him. And then he looked down, and maybe he was lonely, who knows. So anyway, he looked down at his neighbor, and out of that comes up a lotus. The lotus is a form of the world, creation. And on that was sitting the four-headed Brahma. Brahma was the creator, as you see, the personification of the creator in Hinduism is known as Brahma. And he was sitting on the lotus, and he looked around, all around, and he saw only the cosmic waters. It must have been rather lonely, because there he was in the middle of the ocean. He doesn't know where, just on a stalk, a small meager stalk, he's coming out of nowhere, and he felt rather lonely. He had no identity, you see, and we all feel very sad we don't have an identity. We all love to get these identity cards and passports and all these things. So many in India we have a whole lot of cards we're supposed to have to prove who we are. It's really funny. Anyway, so that's why he says, I alone, he alone existed, out of him came that Brahma. And so then he was wondering, where am I? How is this? What am I doing here? Then he looked around and said, let me try going through this stalk and finding out where I can. Then he went through the stalk. He couldn't find anything. He came up again. And at the end of it only, he heard a voice saying, tapa tapa, do tapas, meaning meditate. Tapas is meditation. And he meditated for many thousands of years. And then the Lord gave him his vision of himself as Vishnu, lying on this beautiful, and that was the thing which the reader was reading very slowly and loudly. Description of the beautiful description of Lord Vishnu sleeping on the serpent of time, and the glorious vision which was given to Brahma. So then Narayana told him, okay, now you are the creator. I give you a good office. That's the good thing, that now you can be the creator. And he said, told him that, see, everything is done by tapas only. I create by tapas. I keep up the whole creation is through tapas. And it is through tapas I also retract it into myself. So that is the way that you can do your creation. And then at that he gives him the famous advice, what is known as the चतुश्लोकी भागवत यावानहं यदा भावो यद् रूपगुण संज्ञदः यावानहं यदा भावो यद् रूपगुण संज्ञदः अहमेव वासमे गावरे नान्यद् यत् सत्परं पश्चादहं यदेच्छयो शिष्ये स सोऽस्म्यहम् एतावदेव जिज्ञास्यं तत्त्व जिज्ञासयात्मना यदि यत् स्यात् यदिरेगः स्यात् तस्मात् यदिरेगः स्यात् whatever it is anyway. so he says in the beginning I alone was, then during creation what was it? I alone was, and at the end after creation is retracted, I alone am. So that is the first, the slogan of the Bhagavatam itself. You are told that everything is me alone. I exist before, during, and after creation. So this is the very, very this Chatusloki Bhagavatam is a gist of the whole of the Bhagavad Purana. Is given to whom? Who is this Brahma? He is a creation which comes out of his own navel. So it's not different from him. It's his own, it's himself. So Narayana gives us the discourse on what he is to Narayana in the shape of Brahma. Later on, Narada comes in. Narada is one of the mind-born sons of Brahma. Narada comes to him, and Brahma, Narayana in the shape of Brahma, gives it to Narayana in the form of Narada who has come to him. Now again, Narayana in the shape of Narada gives it to Vyasa, to Narayana in the form of Vyasa. And again, Narayana in the form of Vyasa gives it to his son Narayana in the form of Sudha. And from that Narayana, all of us come. We are all coming from that lineage. What lineage? We are all on that lineage of Narayana alone. All these different colors and of our skin and the differences which we see in the world is nothing at all. It just happens. Sometimes if you stand a long time in the sun, you become black. If you go stay a long time in the there's all different colors and shades. That's all. But actually, all of us have our lineage from Narayana alone. So the Bhagavatam itself says that is how the lineage comes. It is always that sort of advice, spiritual advice, is always given from heart to heart, never from mouth to mouth and through the ears. That never lasts. It is a message which is passed from heart to heart. And Narayana, in the form of Narayana, gave it to all these people. In Kerala, in olden times, there was a man called Narayana, but they all called him Narayana the Bhrandan. That means Narayana who was a bit mad. So then, this man used to go along, he did some weird things. Actually, he was a highly realized soul, a great siddha. So one day he was sitting, somebody gave him a piece of bread. So he sat down next to a dog and he ate a piece, and then he'd give a piece to the dog, and he ate a piece and gave a piece to the dog. And one chap laughed at him. Look at this foolish fellow, you crazy man, eating some bread and giving it to the dog. What does he mean by this? So Narayana then turned around to him and said, here is Narayana giving to Narayana a piece of bread. And Narayana is enjoying that piece of bread. Why are you laughing at that, oh Narayana? He said. So the whole world is peopled by Narayana alone. And thus the knowledge is passed from Narayana to Narayana and who takes various forms, in various different shapes and figures he comes to us. So this Chatusloki Bhagavatam gives us that whole idea that what exists in us, the very first time itself, in the morning itself I said, what is our true existence? It is that I. Everybody has that aham, I am. Even the buffalo knows. He doesn't know he is a buffalo, but he knows aham, I am. We call him a buffalo. But he may not think of himself as a buffalo, but he knows that he is, I am, aham. So all of us, that knowledge of aham, who I am, is in every single one of us. Now, As long as it is within us, deep in us, it is aham. When that aham comes into our conscious mind, it turns into ahamkara. Because then we each feel, I'm different, this is different, that is different, this is different, you are different, I'm different. So there is the differences start when ahamkara comes. When the aham is withdrawn into that conscious mind, it turns into ahamkara. So this is the main whole, this thing of this Chatusloki Bhagavatam, is the fact that we all have that essence of God in us. And that is the thing to which we are all being propelled to go into. We all of us have to understand this. If we end our lives without understanding this, we are 100% we are forced to come back again and again. This is what is hammered into us in every sloga, every story, every one of these skandhas. Again and again, these stories are meant as only a cloak to show us, pointers to us as to who we are. Unfortunately, we have forgotten that, and that has to be reminded again and again and again. That is why it is important to listen to such scriptures like the Bhagavatam, which keeps on reminding us of who you are. If we go on, satsang again, that's a very important part of pilgrimage or of journey to oneself. As I said, which is a journey of the soul from itself to itself. It doesn't realize. Actually, there's no journey. There's no run. When the runner, there's no race. When the runner, the race, the path and the goal are all the same. Where should he run? Where should he go? Where should he reach? It's always, the path is always from here to here. And we don't realize it. Until we realize this, we are forced to come back and take part in the race again. There are some sort of races like that which go round and round, I think. Well, this is one of those races. We keep on going round and round until we realize that we're just, it's like these small little wheels, some squirrels, they are made to feel they're running a race because it's this cage keeps rotating. So they run, thinking they're reaching somewhere. But actually they never reach anywhere at all because they're running in the same old place. So the very similar is the case with all of us. We are also running hard to keep up to the same place that we are. So this idea is brought out in this Bhagavatam again and again to help us to understand that there is, you don't have to search for something which you already have. You don't have to search for you only have to search for something which you don't have. But searching for something which you already have is what Narayana the Bhrantan calls this is stupid. There's another very beautiful story is connected with him. He says he used to live near a hill. So every morning there was a huge stone. He would, with great difficulty, will push it and push it and push it and take it to the top of the hill. And then he'd let go. And then he'll clap his hands to see the stone running down. And when he was asked what you're doing, he said, I'm only doing what all of you are doing. With the greatest of difficulty, you are doing so many things. And then you get so many, clap your hands, thinking, I'm so great, I've done this, I've done that, what all things, I'm such a great person I am. So same thing I'm doing, he says. These great sages, our land is famous with a number of great sages and, totally avaduts and siddhas which we have produced. Age after age, the soil seems to sprout with these great sages. And all of them keep on pointing out, who are you? Who am I? Nisargadatta's great book, which I know most of you must have read, I am that. I am that. And usually when they say, when the Upanishad says, I am that, they do like this. They don't do this. I am that meaning, that is this actually. So they don't point like this, the fingers crooked to point back at you. I am that. So this knowledge that does not lie something away from you. This is that. I am that. Ramana Maharshi also, he kept on giving these, the teaching which he gave was self-inquiry. Who am I? $1,000,000 question. Who am I? They never ask these questions in this, they have these, quizzes, quiz, which they get millions and 10 millions. Why don't they ever ask this one question, who are you? Because I'm sure if that question asked, what will we say? We are 6'4" or 5'7" and brown eyes, black hair, one mole on our cheek, and we have, one ear is a bit crooked. These are all the descriptions you are given in your passport. That's all we can think of. We are our bodies. The descriptions of our bodies, and that's all we can ever think of. So, we are classified as little bits of bodies by the government, by the international authorities, and this body is a description which is given in photos are taken of passports, and you should open up your ears in case your ears are twisted or something like that. So these are the descriptions. We are judged by our body, unfortunately, which is the least important part of us. That is the method by which the world judges us. The Bhagavatam and all great saints keep on hammering the fact, you are not the body, you are not the mind, you are not the intellect. You are that alone, that supreme essence, which is shining in the stars and in the moon and the sun, and which makes the world go round and the sun, planets to revolve. That energy which is in everything is that energy alone is in you. And without that energy, you will be nothing. For instance, there's all this great thing. It's like watching a TV screen, when you all of you are well used to a TV screen. So what is being projected? Light and sound waves. These light and sound waves have a meaning only because of the white, absolutely blank, absolutely colorless, qualityless screen behind it. If there was no screen, they will make no meaning at all. You cannot project light on space and have a meaningful picture. So they have to have a background. Now, background is what gives meaning to a drama of our lives. It's being projected on this white screen of that which is that supreme. And therefore it has a meaning. For instance, sometimes in olden days in India, in some villages, before the advent of TV, which took away half the magic of things. Anyway, they had, a man would go with a screen, with reels. They would go from village to village projecting something. And all the village would come collect in the thing. And they would have a white bed sheet or white cloth or something will be tied up to some trees. And the man would start, and everybody would get highly excited and all that. But sometimes what happens, there's a puff of wind, and just at a very critical point when that hero is going to hug the heroine, it starts to wave. Up and down, and instead of everybody feeling so happy, there's a big burst of laughter from the audience, and the whole thing is spoiled. So because it is only that white screen which gives credibility to that sound and light waves which are being projected. So this is some understanding which we can get from our own life. Without that essence behind us, without that supreme essence which is supporting us all the time, our life would have no meaning. And the only way we can enjoy this life, give it a meaningful turn to it, actual meaningful turn to it, is by being consciously aware that this is it. After that, once you have this conscious awareness, you can go and do everything. It's not that they ask you to stand on your head for 1 hour every morning, sit on a bed of nails for half an hour in the afternoon, or go on a fast for many days. Nothing of the sort is ever said in any of our scriptures. These are all things we put upon ourselves because we want to mortify the flesh to find the truth. Why? The truth is so simple. The truth is so beautiful. and so enjoyable, filled with delight and bliss. Why do we have to mortify the flesh? The only way you need to understand this truth is a change of attitude. It's not something which you can go take a train or take a flight and go to it. It's only a change of the perception, the human perception. You know, there's some pictures. Walt Disney was the first who made these photos. You know, of it was when you look at it, it's an ordinary sort of a scene from a. I don't know whether you've all anyone seen it. It's an ordinary scene from something. Or now they have those things here also. You look at it at some sort of. It looks very beautiful, but then when you look through it, when you don't look at it, when you look through it, suddenly the picture of Krishna appears behind. It's a very strange thing that as long as you're concentrating on that picture, as long we are so enamored of the roles that we forget the actor who plays the roles. We love these roles which he's keeping on playing. It's actually only a mono act. He himself, the whole of creation is actually, we can say, an album of self-portraits of that divine creator, the whole of this universe. So we are so enamored of the photos and the plays and the roles that he's playing that we forget the actor who's doing. Once we can catch hold of that actor, once we realize that there is only one actor, he's doing a mono act throughout, from anything that you might see. We enjoy these mono acts when we see it on us. Why don't you enjoy it now when you see it? Sometimes blind, sometimes lame, sometimes a tyrant, sometimes a lover of God, sometimes a saint, sometimes a murderer. It's only he alone who's playing all these. That's why the sage who can see this can even look at his murderer and say, as an assassin, like Gandhiji and said, Ram, Ram. When he came, he bowed to him and said, Ram, because who was going to kill me? Ram himself. I have been worshipping Ram all my life. Why should he desert me in the time of my death? He alone is coming. Like Bhishma in this morning's Bhishma Stuti, he bowed to Krishna, left his and said, I will be so fortunate if I have, death at thy hands. So this idea is reiterated again and again in the Bhagavata. Unfortunately, so many times we hear only the stories and don't realize that the basis of the whole thing that is trying actually, that the Acharya or Vyasa is trying actually to project this into our minds, that who are you? You are that alone. You have nothing to fear. Whatever happens is only a wave in that ocean of delight. And you will never be deserted. You will never go to eternal hell or anything like that. The river, as I said, will keep on flowing until it reaches the ocean of bliss, which is God Himself. So the whole thing is a play. That's why everything here in Hinduism is called Leela Avatara, a game of. Because what is the reason why he should do a thing like the creation? He's happily sitting on his bed of the Vasuki or the snake. Why should he project himself into this? So then, but the question is, why should a child make castles on the sand? He knows that next wave will take off the castle. Why? Because it's a krida, it's a game. It's a beautiful game which a child loves to play. Similarly, it looks as if the creator also plays with his own self. The plays are all inclusive of his own, as I said, he is himself being projected into every character, into everything that we find. And this is that one lesson which is being hammered into us. And by the end of this Saptaham, I'm sure you'll all go back fully enlightened souls. The Holika yesterday was burnt up yesterday. Similarly, the Holika of ignorance will surely be burnt by these constant reminders of who you are, and we'll all emerge from the Saptaham as fully enlightened divine beings. Hari Om Tat Sat. Chatusloki Bhagavatam, where Brahma gets the advice of the whole of the creation and the rest of it from Narayana himself, and you see that Brahma is only, in fact Brahma is nothing but Narayana, and we all can take proudly say, if they ask you, but never write this in your passport, who your father is and who, you say if you're Narayana, 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 filled up everywhere, Narayana, they will send you straight to where they wanted to send Narayana to Brahman. You see, people think they're crazy. Now, so after that, again he goes back to the Mahabharata war, which of course I have already mentioned this before because it was more in keeping with that. At the end of the Mahabharata, before the war, as I told you, they tried their best. Yudhishthira wanted to have peace at all costs, in fact. So he asked Krishna himself, one of the beautiful scenes in the Mahabharata, where the Lord goes as ambassador to of the Pandavas to the court of the Kurus. In fact, that's one of the things which Bhishma says. You've treated him as if you've sent him as an ambassador. You've treated him as a friend. You've treated him as even a mere charioteer. You've done this. You've looked upon him, and he has taken it all lying down. He's not a word. He has showed neither humility nor exaltation and anything you've done for him. And yet he says, Bhishma says, and yet, how is it that you who have had the amazing contact with such a great soul should have had such suffering in your life? That's another point. Such suffering they had in their life, despite the fact that, as Bhishma says, he had the son of Dharma as the head. Yudhishthira was son of Dharma. Arjuna, the great archer. Bhima, the strong man, and Krishna himself all the time fetching and carrying for them, You can imagine this amazing luck of these Pandavas, and yet they went through such terrible suffering. So that is a kind of a lesson to us that, like as Kunti says, even though we may have to go, even though we're the most beloved people of God himself, yet it is possible that we may have to go through suffering because something in our karma makes us go through this. But as long as we have him as our sole traveling companion, we need not fear. These things come and go, as Kunti says. Let problems come and go. That is the nature of the world. I don't want to change it. I don't want to ask you to make a special concession for me and give me a problem-free life. That would be both selfish as well as impossible. So why should I ask you for that? It's not possible. The only thing is, she asks for that attitude of mind in which I will have you always with me. I will think of you always. Whenever I'm not, both in my need, in my good times and bad times, let me always think of you and you alone. So that is the idea which was given at that time. Now, actually, it is only now that the Bhagavatam goes to that scene where before the war, when they were the gambling match and so on, and they went to the forest and they came back and they sent Krishna as ambassador, and Bhagavan went and even showed his Vishwarupa, which nobody saw except he gave Dhritarashtra eyesight actually. For the first time, he and Gadadri also are. Duryodhana didn't see. Most of them didn't see. Actually, they closed their eyes. Blinding light, so I couldn't bear it. So only the rishis and a few others were actually able to see it. So then at that time, when they refused to succumb, because Yudhishthira says, I'm willing to settle for anything. Let them give me half the kingdom which was promised to me as my right when we left the forest. If he refuses that, ask him to give me 5 cities. If he refuses that, ask them to give me 5 villages. And if he refuses even that, tell him to give us at least 5 palaces for ourselves. So Duryodhana tells him, says, look, I'm against the principle of giving. As a principle, I don't like giving. So just go and tell that coward, if he wants his country back, he can fight for it. So that was his final say on this matter. So then, and when Krishna again advised him, he even tried to capture Krishna, because he knew that if Krishna was with his Pandava's side, had no hope of winning. So he even tried to capture Krishna, and that, of course, was the time when he actually showed the Vishwarupa, and he came out. And after that, that was the time then Vidura broke the bow and said, I cannot stay with you. And Vidura left on the pilgrimage. As I told you, he went alone and he roamed around. He went about incognito, because he went to places where nobody would know that this was the prime minister of the Kurus. He was the prime minister of the Kurus. Had he gone as the prime minister of the Kurus, with all the paraphernalia which nowadays the politicians have, with 5 cars behind and 10 cars in front, and ping pong, and pushing people out of the way and getting there, by all. But if that was done, then I'm glad the person who I was thinking wasn't just sitting at the back. Anyway, so he did not. He only went as a very ordinary pilgrim from place to place. He slept on the altara is a people tree, and sometimes he didn't go for the first class of 5-star hotels or anything like that. He slept where he could. He ate what was given in every temple, ate the prasadam, and thus he spent 36 years, and he didn't even hear of the Holocaust which took place. He didn't even know what had happened. And he just went, by the time, at the end of that, he was filled with a kind of a great aura of, he was like a sage. He was such an enlightened sage himself. At that time is a time when we see the given where he returns. When he's returning, he goes to, his whole being was filled with thoughts of Krishna. Suddenly he was infused with thoughts of Krishna, and he thought to himself, I wish I could see him once more. And when he came to Vrindavan, he thought, there he is, because he thought he saw Krishna coming towards him. Actually, it was not Krishna, it was Uddhava, the great friend, Bhakta, and Prime Minister of the Yadavas. It was Uddhava. And Uddhava is one who had lived with Krishna almost the whole of his life. From the age of 12 he was with him, eating with him, drinking with him, sleeping with him. He only wore the discarded clothes which Krishna had worn the previous day. He would only wear the garlands which Krishna had discarded the previous day. He was so in tune with Krishna that actually he looked almost like Krishna. So from far, Vidura thought he was indeed Krishna and ran towards him. Then he hugged him and said, where are you coming in? What is happening to our Lord? What is the news of the Yadava? And for one solid hour, Uddhava could not speak. His eyes filled with tears. They were just running. His eyes were running with tears. And for 1 hour he could not speak when he thought of how his master had departed from this plane of consciousness. And then he recounted all the Krishna Leelas from the time he was born right up to the time of the war, and even after that he told all the stories. The whole thing is about the stories of his Krishna Leelas, which of course we won't go into now, because we will go into great detail when we come to the 10th skanda. And then Uddhava said, so Vidura asked, did he not leave any message for me? Did he not tell anything for me? So Uddhava says, yes, he remembered you. Even at the end, he remembered you. But I am not the one who to give you his message. He has directed the great sage called Maitreya. He is the one he has told him to meet you and give you the message which he has given only for you. So Uddhava said, he has told me to go on to Badrika Ashram. So I shall proceed to go on there, because that is what he has told me. So, and you may go on. So Vidura went on and went to the ashram, Maitreya's ashram, which again is situated on the banks of the Ganga in Haridwar. So we're coming close again. All the time we come back to Haridwar, the most holy city in Rishik. At that time, maybe Haridwar is one of the oldest cities. Next to Varanasi, it's the oldest city in the world. Oldest continuity of civilization and culture, like Varanasi. It is a continuous living, people have been living in it. So that's why Haridwar comes in all the Puranas, so because it's been obviously existing for so many years previous. So then he goes to the banks of the Ganga in Haridwar and goes to the ashram of sage Maitreya, and the rest of it, for the rest of a few chapters, and to the end of the Skanda in fact, it is Vidura Maitreya Sambhashna. That is a conversation between Vidura and Maitreya. All the other things which are asked, it is questions asked by Vidura and Maitreya's answers for these things. So he asked, first he asks Maitreya about creation. How did creation? Now you say he has in the Chatusloki Bhagavatam, Narayana told Brahma to create. And he gave him the seeds of creation by which he asked him to create. So and these seeds, later on Brahma is to tell that it's nothing new that he gave him. In Hinduism, creation is cyclical, not a line as it is in the West. That one fine day, God created the world, and then it goes dum 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 dum, and one fine day, that's the end of it. But this is not so. It keeps repeating. It's a circle. Everything is a circular motion. Like everything everything is circular motion. The planets are circular. The planets circular. Everything is circular. So creation is circular. So when the during this just after in summer, nothing is left on the ground. You'll find everything is brown and horrible looking and no grass, unless of course you've got a big source of water and you keep watering it all through. It's like that. It's just brown. But with the very first drops of rain, when the monsoons come, just a few days later, you look out of the window and there is a small patch of green all over. Where did these things come from? Where were they? Nobody planted them. Nobody did anything for them. But they were always latent inside the earth. Similarly, all the things that happen, all the creatures, all our souls and so on, they're all latent. They're staying ready for an opportunity to burst into bloom, as it were. Now you see everywhere, you see things. Holi, in fact, is a festival of spring, when everything bursts into bloom in here, and children go around every morning putting little bits of flowers which they have stolen from your own garden onto your steps every morning. So this is the way that the Holi, and in Vrindavan, the Krishna and Radha and all the gopis, of course, would play. They would not chemical. Luckily, they didn't have any chemical colors at that time. So they would make colors from squeezing, putting flowers in water, and they had something called a pichikadi. Pichikadi, it's a kind of a gun. It's a gun where they put the flowers, and then they would. That is actually the initial game of Holi, which Krishna and the gopis used to play at one time. Now, of course, like everything, it becomes very violent. Like I said, everything's. It has to, because even some good has to turn to bad at one time or other, because good and bad are opposite poles. We cannot have one without the other. So that is the origin of Holi. So now, how does, as I said, the creation is cyclical. One spring follows, summer follows spring, autumn follows summer, and exactly like that, when the end of the eon. In that cycle is followed even in our everyday life. There's Nitya Pralaya also, and that is that Pralaya. Pralaya means total non-existence of everything. It's a layer. So it's like submerged in that. Now, even for us, we have a Pralaya every day. When does that happen? When the world does not exist? That is the time of deep sleep. Where does the world go? It folds back into yourself. And again in the morning when you open that, it comes out of yourself. I, immediately it comes out. So that is a Nitya Pralaya was going. Then there's Naimittika Pralaya, Prakritika Pralaya, and so on. And eventually the Pralaya, which he describes the whole time cycle, huge time cycle. The 43.1, and the yugas also. I told you the yugas are Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, then Dwapara Yuga, and the Kali Yuga. These are Chatur Yugas. Now this cycle of goes on, and one Chatur Yuga corresponds to 43.2 million human years. Just one Chatur Yuga. So, and this Brahma's day actually corresponds to some many of these Chatur Yugas. So the concept of time in Hinduism is just amazing. Western concept of time, they say most 2000 years only the world has existed. Just 2000, with the birth of Christ. I mean, before that they said, okay, maybe a little bit of the world did exist. But mainly after the world. Now we are only in 20-something, aren't we? 2016 are we? So, nothing much. The concept is so limited. Here they talk of Chatur Yugas and Parardhas, Ardha Pradardha. This Brahma, every eon, every cycle of Brahma, there's one Brahma, one Indra, one Manu, all of them come again and again and again and again. And apparently now we are in the 51st, the Brahma of this present Brahma, we are in the 51st, first morning of the 51st year of this Brahma, and he's already getting agitated. He's already turned 50. My God, only another 50 years more to live. Brahma gets so agitated. So what about us? Why not we also get agitated? There's that is a huge concept of time. And concept on that side, and at the end of this scale, they have words for microminutes. Microminutes, can you imagine? The time taken for a ray of sunlight to pass one thing. One bit of dust. One bit of dust, a mote of dust to pass through this thing of sunlight. So, they have microminutes as well as Ardha Pradardhas. So this is a fantastic concept from that to this scale of idea of time is so fantastic, we can't even, unbelievable that they could think of such things. Not think, they knew, obviously they knew. These are the facts which only now, 20th century, that Western scientists have agreed that time is not as small as we think it is. Because, and also of course, the concept of time and space itself, even though they had words for all this is all Maitreya, the talk between them, So even though they knew, they had this, yet they knew, though they realized that in actual fact this sort of time did exist, they still knew that time has nothing real. Space and time has no reality at all. Again, something only which now it has been found. They knew that space and time is a process of the mind. The process, time, in the human being, a time is a line which starts with birth and ends with death. In my life, it will starts with birth and ends with death. That is my amount of time that I know. So, the fact is that though they were capable of understanding scientific truths, which were only discovered recently in the Western world, yet they knew that actually speaking, this is all Maya. The whole thing is a concept of the mind. The whole thing is something which we can well do without. Because it's just that we're so conscious. That's why, now another thing, you see, this thing of, I told you the one day of the gods, it corresponds to 1 year, human year. 6 months of day and 6 months of night. So, why does it seem that the higher they go, the time seems to lessen? Now, in our own life, it's like that. For a child, child wants to go to the zoo. You tell her, we'll go tomorrow, dear. Tomorrow! Tomorrow will never come for a child. Just imagine how long it takes to reach tomorrow. For it's enormous count the number of minutes before you reach tomorrow. Child goes through all that. The older you go, the faster the time goes. When we get up, we see the sunrise. Before you know it, it's already sunset. Just a while ago, we saw that sun here. Now it's already reached there. One day gone. One day, precious day of our life is gone. And have you gained anything out of it is what? So time rushes the higher our consciousness goes. That's why these beings of high consciousness like Brahma, the gods and so on, their time goes like this. In the Krishnavattara you will find that. There's a beautiful story called the Brahmaratra which shows this so beautifully. It's a second for them, which is a day or a month for us. So this concept of time is beautifully brought out in the creation of the world. That we just understand how vast was their knowledge, scientific knowledge, paravidya. They had two vidyas, paravidya, which entire scientific knowledge which we have, all the sciences we know, is known as paravidya. So but there is aparavidya, that which is beyond that para. And they say that this is nothing. All the knowledge which we have gained about this hard-earned knowledge which we have gained about the world in this as it exists is nothing, because we don't know that knowledge which exists beyond that. That is an actual knowledge we should know about. This knowledge, what is it going to give you? It may give you comfort, it may give you, but comfort and bliss are different. Comfort and happiness are totally different. You may be, as I said, Mukesh Ambani, enjoying so very rich, having everything, air-conditioned apartment and beautiful beds and cots and hundreds of rooms. You can sleep in one new room every day of your life, and you never go through that, according to somebody who is working with Mukesh Ambani. So there's never an end. But that you have comfort. But I wonder if they have bliss. I wonder if they really have this enjoyment. So comfort is totally different from bliss. So all that scientific knowledge, all that science which can give us, it can give us comfort, but it cannot give us bliss. So this is the great knowledge of our ancients, and it is quite amazing how having this great, so much of knowledge of the world, so much of scientific knowledge in their hands, yet they never put it to use only to help the physical comforts, to aid physical comforts. The accent was always to gain that, by gaining which they did not have to gain anything else ever after. All the questions in the Upanishads, the students would go to the master and say, "Oh master, what is it that by gaining which I know everything? What is that knowledge by knowing which I can know everything?" This was their constant question. This was their constant desire to catch hold of the highest. Having caught hold of the highest, they, in olden ages, the generals always would try to catch a hill. The first one to catch hold of that hill, because then they could see its surrounding land, and they could know, exactly where to send their. The children have to sit down, Please sit. Yamuna, go. Baito, beta. Baito. So this is the knowledge at which they all aimed at. This knowledge, which was the supreme knowledge, is what they aimed at. All other knowledge they did have, but they counted it as worthless, useless knowledge. All the knowledge the world has today, they count as useless knowledge, because it doesn't give us happiness or bliss. And we are creatures of bliss. We are the inheritors of bliss. Why do you deny yourself this bliss just for the sake of a bit of comfort? All we crave for is comfort. And so many our sages and so on, so many of them who have this, one, I don't know whether you must have heard of this story perhaps, but when Alexander the Great came to India and he was told that there was a great sage who was, he could do anything. If anyone went to him, he would bless them and they would be cured, and he knew everything and so on. So Alexander said, okay, bring him here, I'd like to meet him. So his people went to the sage and said, Alexander the Great wants to meet you. He looked at him and said, but I don't want to meet him. So then they went back and told her, he said, he doesn't want to meet me. Go tell him who I am. So they went back and said, told him who he was. So he says, but it hardly interests me, I'm not interested in meeting him. So then at last Alexander was amazed. How a man who doesn't want to meet him, because he's the conqueror of the whole world. He's just finished, all the way from Macedonia, he's been, conquering land after land after land after land. And at last he came, and then he went to see the sage. The sage was sitting in front of the cave, right in front. Early rising sun was there, and he was looking at the sun and meditating or doing something. And Alexander stood right in front of him like this and said, do you know who I am? Sage looked at him, no. He says, I can give you anything, I can kill you this minute if I want. So the sage said, okay, if that's what you want. So then he says, are you not afraid of me? He says, no. So he says, what do you want? Okay, tell me what you want. He said, I don't want anything. Then Alexander said, a person who wants nothing, I can give you money, I can give you a house, I can look at the dirty clothes you're wearing, I can give you a nice set of clothes. So tell me, after pestering him for a long time, the sage said, okay, then you can do something for me. So Alexander said, what? Please move away from that, because you're blocking the sunlight, which is, I get that sunlight only for a couple of hours. It was winter, obviously. Please move away, we are blocking the sunlight. So that is a type of bliss. This man had no comfort, but he was ever in a state of bliss. So the whole of the Hindu culture was always moving toward that. They did not care for the casual comforts of modern civilization. They could have had it. When we are going very next, tomorrow itself, you will see how Kardama Prajapati was able to make an aerial mansion for his wife, and was able to take her anywhere she wanted. But they did not care for that. Their whole quest in life, they did not want to waste their life running after ephemeral pleasure. They concentrated on how they could get that bliss, that which was never ending, which would last them throughout not their life, but throughout eternity. So these are the description of the world and so on, which is given by Maitreya. So then he said, okay, you told me about Brahma creating and all that. How did Brahma create? So Brahma was asked to create. Now Brahma looked around and said, no, I have to create. So he started creating the mind-born sons. Yes, the four boy sages, Sanaga, Sanandana, Sanatkumara and all, he created his mind-born son. Then they all, and he told them, you must create, come on, we have to propagate this world somehow or other. And that's what the orders have got from above. The population was not anywhere near what it is. There was no population at all. So he said, you have to create. So they said, sorry, we are not interested in creation at all. We prefer to go somewhere and meditate on the Lord. So off they went. Then he made another set of people. They also said, mind-born sons, many of them were mind-born sons. So they also said, sorry, Father, we prefer to go and meditate in the Himalayas or something like that. Now, poor Brahma, can you imagine, even we who have so much of, knowledge about, the Supreme and this thing and so on, and how much we all are interested in getting liberation, if all our children, one after the other, told us, no, I'm not going to get married, I'm going to go and become a monk. I'm sure no mother or father would be happy. Oh, good, my son is going to become a monk. No way. They'll all want them to have the usual married life with great children and they'll think that is the way. They would not be interested at all in sons who don't prefer not to lead an ordinary life. So then Brahma was rather unhappy about the whole thing. Then one of his creations was Rudra actually. He was angry, so out of his anger was born Rudra, who cried out, give me names, give me places, and so on. Then he said, what did you create? And Rudra's creations were so horrible, with 3 eyes and 5 arms. And he said, stop, don't create, that's enough of your creation. At last, Brahma decided to take a drastic step. He cut himself in 2 and produced, one was Manu, Swayambhu Manu, and the other half was Shatarupa. Now the word Manu is very strange. Manu comes from the word man or mind. The English word man comes from this mind. So Manu was, man is something who has mind. So all have esoteric meaning. Man is some creature who has a mind. And who is he married to? Shatarupa, with hundreds of forms. The mind is capable of making hundreds of forms. He's married to Shatarupa. And after that, creation continued in the normal way of procreation and on. So what was the original problem with Brahma's creation was that he had not created a woman. How can men be ever expected to create anything? Without a woman at their side, they certainly cannot create anything worthwhile. So this is the teaching that we have got to learn from this, that until he created a woman, Shatarupa, there was no possibility of further creation on his part. So from that is the creation starts. Now, at that time, he tells Manu to create, and creation goes on as usual. But at that time, he looks around. He's supposed to create in this planet, you see. So then Shatarupa comes. No, Manu goes back to his father Brahma and says, "Look, you told me to create, but unfortunately, I cannot find the world. The world has been stolen. The world has been taken off by one terrible asura called Hiranyaksha. He has taken him and hidden him in the Rasatala. Is this time for tea, is it? Huh? What time is tea time? 4:15. Okay. He has got, yeah? What? So he has taken him and hidden him off in the Rasatala. So the earth has disappeared. He says, you're a fine father, you tell me to create and you don't give me a place in which I can place my creation. Where has it gone? So then Brahma says, now what is happening now? Let me ask, because most of these people, they can do nothing by themselves. They have to refer to the highest authority. Like even when Prime Minister, past Prime Minister, he had no authority on his own. He had to refer to somebody else before he could make any decision. So similarly, even Brahma, great though he was, he had to get the final decision from headquarters, which is Narayana. So he went and he was just thinking of that. And at that time, he felt a little tickling in his nose. And he sneezed, and out of it came out a tiny little ball. Tiny little ball. There's another of Bhagavan's Leelas. It is a cosmic ball which came to enormous proportions very fast. Now before that, the question they all asked him, who is the Shaunakadis and the other saints on in Naimisharanyam, he asked them, who is this Hiranyaksha? Who is this, what is the story of this Asura who suddenly appeared and took off the earth like this? Please give us his story, is what they say. കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ടില്ലേ അല്ലേ അപ്പം ഞാൻ പറയാം പക്ഷേ So he said, okay, the fact is that at one time, the four boy sages, or Sanaka, Sananda, Sanat Kumara, they went to Vaikunda to try and meet Bhagwan, Narayana. So when they went to Vaikunda, they were stopped by the two doorkeepers called Jaya and Vijaya. Now this is very common. If all of those who have gone to Guruvayur temple and other temples in the south, you will find that the doorkeepers are real terrors. Even however, they're like asuras, really speaking. So they try to stop you from entering, even if you are the greatest of all saints, even if you're the greatest of all people. Unless, of course, they're tip-top, it's a political minister, something, the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, the sister-in-law, the daughter-in-law, the minister in charge, then they will be let through. Otherwise, ordinary beings like us, they will try and stop. This is obviously, that parampara started from this Jaya Vijaya. So, here the Jaya Vijaya stopped this people from entering. I said no. So, the four boy sages were quite angry. I mean, the curse of rishis actually always has a certain good ending. It's meant for the good thing of the people concerned. So they cursed them that you who are behaving in this asuric fashion, who are behaving such it's not a thing which you, in front of a temple, in front of Vaikunda, in front of the Lord's very entrance, you are behaving like asuras. So you should be damned, that curse that you go to the earth. So they cursed them. So of course Vishnu came out and begged pardon for his the doorkeepers. The doorkeepers were very contrite and said, please help us. Now what do? We don't want to leave you. We don't really want to do. So this is a particularity of Krishna Avatara. There's something called liberation through confrontation. That is, what gives you liberation is the amount of attention or concentration that your mind can have on the Lord. It doesn't matter through whatever means. It can be through fear, like Kamsa, you will hear after. It can be through terror. It can be through anger. It can be through hatred. And of course, it can be through any types of love. But all the different types of love. But of course, it's not this thing through confrontation is not available for most of us. But Krishnāvatara actually says that it is possible. Because if you hate someone, you're constantly thinking of that person. As much concentration there is as if you are in love with somebody. So this is only in Krishnāvatara, because he is a God of love. And anyone, in any way, if anybody tries to reach him through concentration, he goes to them in that very form, it is said. So then he told them, he asked them, Vishnu told them, there is a choice. You can take 14 birds as my friends, my devotees, or you can have 3 birds as my enemies. What do you choose? They chose the 3 birds as his enemies. And the first birth was as a Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Then in the next birth, which was Ravana and Kumbhakarna, and during the time of Krishnāvatara, they were born as Shishupala and Dandavaktra. And you will notice that the ferocity becomes progressively less. Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu were very, very fierce. The titans, they were titans. In the next, Ravana and Kumbhakarna, not so much. And Shishupala and Dandavaktra hardly much at all. They were like human beings. But these 3 are so the answer to this question of how is it, who is this Hiranyaksha, how did he appear, what is his story? So again, Maitreya tells him the story of Hiranyaksha and how he, the story of Diti and Aditi. Is there time for me to say the story of Diti and Aditi? Yeah? Can I say, is there time? Or shall we stop and take it afterward? Okay, since it looks as if you all want me to say. So we will say. So now the two Diti and Aditi were the sons of Manu, and they were the wives of the Prajapati, Kashyapa Prajapati. They were the wives of them. And this is a very strange thing. Again, you find only in Hinduism this amazing ability to idea of the sense of duality. Didi was the mother of all the devas. I mean, Aditi was the mother of all the devas. Didi was the mother of all the asuras or the danavas. Sisters here, the same father, and one gets all asuras, the other gets all the devas. So in Hinduism, there's no irreconcilable dichotomy between good and evil as there is in the Western other religions. They are both. They're not irreconcilable. They have to find a conciliatory method by which they can find a unity in a higher principle. Because both come from that same height. Both good and evil come the same source. No Semitic religion will ever say that. God is all good, God is all wonderful, God is all beauty, God is all loving. Then the question is, but where did evil come from? So immediately what do? They create a devil on whose poor head all evil is thrust. Anything which is bad, it goes one box. That's the devil's box is the good things going to God's box, devil's box. That's the only way they could overcome this dilemma of good and evil. Now, if you really, anyone with a thinking mind will say, anything good, anything wonderful, anything that God does, devil can come and pull it down. So that means devil is actually superior to God. Because poor God, not only he's not omnipotent, he becomes impotent. Because everything he can do can be pulled down by the devil. So that is the way that all Semitic religions dealt with the dilemma of good and evil. Only in Hinduism you find it is not an that's why the gods, the two sisters are the mothers of the gods and the devil, and the asuras and the devas, and they have the same father. See how beautifully that's brought out. So, and Kashyapa, of course, Kashyapa is torn between his two wives. Once the asuras will win, the other time the devas will win. So once Diti will come in with a lot of complaints, and the other one, the Aditi will come with a lot of complaints. Because one time the asuras overcoming devas, other time devas overcoming. Meaning to say, one time the negative traits will come up, another time the positive traits come up. They're always at warring. And always Kashyapa is standing there, and he has to deal with his two wives who have complaints all the time about how the other wives, his sisters, their sisters' children are overcoming her. So this Kashyapa is always in a state of samadhi. Then suddenly one wife will come and nudge him, hey, please come out of your samadhi, there's something very important. And so he would just agree because he didn't care really. He was like the witness to everything. If that's what they wanted, let them have it. So then at one time, Diti at Sandhya Samay, that is Sandhya is twilight. They have three Sandhyas in a day, morning, when the sun comes up, when the day meets night meets a day, in the mid-noon again, when the sun is at zenith, and again in the night when the day meets a night. So those are called Sandhyas. At Sandhya Samayam is very important. The whole of the cosmos, there's something very, very attuned. We can attune our mind to the whole of creation. And it's good for any spiritual activity. That's why at Sandhya Samay we always sit for prayers. We don't go, doing ordinary things at that time. So unfortunately, this Diti came at Sandhya Samay. One day when Kashyapa was meditating at Sandhya, she came to him and insisted that he have intercourse with her. So he told her, look, you are asking for something totally against all rules. If you have a child by which you get during Sandhya Samay will turn into an asura. He could only advise. He couldn't. He had. It was a husband's duty always to give in to her wife's wishes. Hope all husbands realize any wish, not just this, any wish. It's always a duty of a husband to give in to his wife's wishes. So, so these Kashyapa said, all right, then let's have a go at it, and off they went. And naturally, the Asuric, one of the Jayavijayas, one of them, both of them, sorry, both of them fell into a womb as titans, tremendous, and there was a lot of thunderstorm and so on and so forth at the time of their birth, because Didi tried to keep them in fact, but she couldn't keep them in more than she could. And she was very contrite for what she has done. And she begged her husband, do something about this, I don't want such children. He said, well, you opted for it, my dear. I told you exactly what would happen if we got a child at this time. So you have to grin and bear it. And she begged and begged, please help me. And he said, all right, one thing I can tell you, you will have a grandson who is the greatest, Uttama Sloga, Uttama Bhagavadottama he'll become. He'll be the greatest of all devotees. One of your son, your grandson will become a great bhakta. So that much only I can give you consolation for this. Otherwise, you'll just have to put up with these asuric children. What else can you do? You brought them into the world, and you might as well now take care of the consequences of these children. So Hiranyaksha was the eldest of these two, and Hiranyaksha is the one. He was very eager to have a good fight. Some people think, my arms are itching for a fight. Well, he was one of those. He was very, very determined that somehow or other he must have a good fight. He couldn't fight. Maybe he fought occasionally with his brother, because I'm sure his brother was about the only one with whom he could have a good sort of a fight. So anyway, he said he was fed up with this fighting with his brother, so he went around roaring all over the three worlds and saying, I want to have a fight, I want to do this, and fine. So then Narada, as usual, is very helpful in all these matters. So Narada came to him and said, well, I'll tell you something. What, dear? So he came and told him, he came to him and said, look, I'll tell you something. Actually, this, Narayana himself has taken, and he's the only one who is fit. Who's fitting, who will make a fitting opponent for you, whom you can have a good fight with. So then Hiranyaksha said, all right, where is he? Where is he? In between that was his other little thing which he took the earth and hid it in Yasatala and all that sort of thing. And that was the time when Brahma went to Narayana and asked him, and that was the time when this comes. Now I think that we'll take the avatar after this thing. So then we'll stop with this and we'll go for tea. Some little bit of comfort now and again is in between bliss is also good. So we will meet again soon, immediately after tea. Hari Om Sat. So then, as we saw, Kashyapa gave in to his wife's wishes, and she conceived these. Just as the curse was being said, these two doorkeepers, Jaya and Vijaya, were thrown into Didi's womb at that time. And even at the time of conception, there was a lot of thunderstorm and typhoons and all sorts of inauspicious comets and some things were seen. And Didi knew that she had done something really wrong, and she was she did her best to keep these in for as long as she could. But of course, eventually it happened that they had to come out, and these became the enormous titans known as Hiranyaksha was the elder, Hiranyakashipu was the second. So Hiranyaksha, again, he was as I told you, he was itching for a fight. His arms were always itching for a fight. So he roamed around all over the world, and it's said, when he goes through the oceans, it is said that The whole ocean, when he strives with the deepest of the ocean, it comes up only up to his waist. So you can imagine how enormous he was. So first of all, he thought he'd go and have a fight, have a bout with the Varuna, the Lord of the Waters. So Varuna, of course, he certainly didn't want to come into a close encounter with this huge titan. So he said, no, I'm afraid I'm not the man for you. But I will tell you something. I think the person you are looking for is Lord Vishnu, and he is a good, perfect match for you. So Hiranyaka, where is he? Where is he? And he went around, thrashing around the waters and so on. And he had, it was this, and he had already taken away the earth and put her in Jasatala far down. And that was the time when Swayambhu Manu asked Brahma, how can I procreate any people when the earth is no longer here? And then so Brahma thought to himself, now what am I to do, get the earth back? Because I've told him that he should people the earth with some forms or other. And now the earth itself has disappeared. Now what can I do? So then, as usual, they had to resort to high headquarters, as I said. So he went to Vishnu and asked him, now what can I do? The earth seems to have disappeared. So just before he could even finish his sentence, he sneezed, as I told you, and a tiny little ball came out of it. It's amazing how the different methods by which the Lord projects himself out. You are forced to imagine that it's really a whole game. The whole thing is one big game for him. He just loves this. So then he came out, and within minutes he grew into such gigantic proportions that his head reached the skies. So his first work was, of course, he went to Rasatala, and there was the poor earth quivering with fear about this. He took her up on his tusks, and it said the earth was just like a tiny little, those red beads on his tusk. She was as small as a red bead because he was so enormous. There's some photos you find of the sizes of the earth and the different planets and so on. So it was like that. She's a tiny little thing, really speaking. She's not much of a planet. So it's the smallest little planet. So he took her and put her back and fixed her so that she would never fall. Actually, this is sort of a hint that he gave her the power of gravity so that she would not float around. Now, there's a strange thing which is mentioned here. The fact is that planets appear to be floating around as weightless balls. How does this happen? It is said that there are certain conditions, internal conditions. These planets have certain internal conditions which allow them to float around as weightless balls. And if these internal conditions are disturbed due to some reason or other, they are likely to fall into that ocean called the Garbhodaga Ocean, far beyond, that is on the tip of the universe, the whole universal system. It is at the tip of that very system. So they fall into that ocean, it is said. And another horrifying fact is that we are well on the way to disturbing the internal conditions of our poor planet, the Earth. We are digging her, we've stopped digging her for coal, or we're digging her up for petroleum. We are digging into her bowels to find out so many things. And so many things are happening in this, digging right into her. And you really feel that it's possible that one of these days they are going to disturb those internal conditions and the earth may go hurtling down again to some place or other. So anyway, we'll be out of it before that, I'm sure. So we've still some time to go. So he fixed her up. Then by this time Hiranyaka came in. Where is that Vishnu? Where is that Vishnu? Let me get that hold of that chap and I will make mincemeat out of him. So he came up, he's a wielder of the mace, and he went roaring around. And then he suddenly saw the Lord. Lord just totally disregarded him because first he wanted to keep the earth into a proper place and give her gravity so that no other person could, drag her around anymore. So then he fixed her properly. Then only he turned round to face Hiranyaka. Now, then Hiranyaka laughed and laughed. Look at this. This is Vishnu, is it? He's only a wild animal. look at this funny creature which is coming to. And he thought, I'll make short work of him. And even though he was also holding the mace. So then, the Lord loves to have a little fight with his devotees. And he knew that this was one of the two, Jaya or Vijaya, who was facing him, his own doorkeepers, who had been thrust into his hole. So then he parried with him and had a jolly good fight with him. And Hiranyaksha was surprised. He thought within a few minutes he would get rid of this. After all, he's a wild boar. How much can he know about mace fighting? But very soon he found that it was quite difficult and impossible, in fact, to get even with this boar. So he said, what a bore this is really. I must get him to, what shall I do now? So then it was already, this was the time, Sandhya Samaya already. So Brahma and all the other devas, always find when the Lord has a fight or something, all the devas would flock around and to clap hands or make some music or something like that. They're very, very happy to form the audience for the Lord's Leelas. So they all flocked around. And Brahma, in his role as a grandsire, he thought he should give a word of advice to the Lord. He whispered to him, look, don't parry with him too much. It's already approaching Sandhya Samaya. And these asuras, they grow in strength during Sandhya Samaya. The darker, when night comes, they grow in strength. Before his strength increases, just finish it off. This is a good time. And the boar, Bhagavan boar turned and gave a small smile. He said, as if he's advising him who's above all time on an auspicious time to kill an asura. He who has nothing like auspicious or inauspicious, and who's above the whole idea itself of time. So the Bhagavan Varahamurti was rather pleased to see, or he gave a little smile at Brahma's advice to him. And then he decided, actually he even allowed Hiranyaksha to fell his mace down. And Hiranyaksha was for some reason, he was very gentlemanly and waited for the boar to pick up his mace again. So the Vishnu applauded his doorkeepers. He knew he must have something of which he had gained in Vaikunta. So then, in the end, when they were he decided this is the last that he's doing, and he took up his Sudarshan Chakra, but he just said he gave a cut on his ear, behind his ear, just one, and this gigantic titan fell to the ground and was killed. So, and of course, all the devas would come and extol him, and these are all different leelas of the Lord. One thing, it doesn't really have to happen, but it happens because he wants it to happen. And it happens because it gives us all pleasure to hear these stories. So then, this was the end of Hiranyaksha, and now we actually go. Are we going? Nipona? So then, at that time, Hiranyakashipu was very, very angry. പക്ഷേ അതിന് മുമ്പേ കർദ്ദമ പ്രധാനമന്ത്രി വേണ്ടേ? ദേവഹൂതിയിലല്ലേ പിന്നെ പറഞ്ഞേ? അപ്പോൾ Hiranyakashipuവിനെ പിന്നെ പറയാം. അതെ മറ്റു. So then, Hiranyakashipu, of course, his younger brother, he was very angry with him, and that's another story. We won't go into that now. The next story is actually all the different creations of Brahma, various species are created, and various things happen, and so on and so forth. And eventually, he comes back. He goes back. Maitreya goes back to the children of Swayambhu Manu. Actually, we're going to take that, but I will say a little now. Swayambhu Manu had 2 sons and 3 daughters. That is his Uttanapada and Premvrata and Uttanapada, the sons, and the daughters were Ahuti, Prasudi and Devahuti. All rather nice names. I don't know why people don't put names like that for the children. Hey, Ahudi, come here, Ahudi. Sounds rather good, I think. Anyway, the, there was a great sage called Kardama Prajapati. Now he was, Prajapatis are all patriarchs, rulers of the world actually. So Kardama Prajapati was a great soul, and Brahma, one of Brahma's children of course, and Brahma wanted him to marry, and because again he was one of those who preferred to go into the jungle and meditate. So Brahma begged him, please, my dear son, you must really listen to me this time and marry and get some children, because the earth is not really well populated. So then Kardama Prajapati, as usual, instead of going around looking for a wife, he decided he'll meditate. He'll meditate on Lord Vishnu and ask him for a good wife. Now that is one of the very clever things which everybody should do, because instead of going around and choosing a wife for oneself, which may never have a happy conclusion, if you pray to God, it just shows that he can easily bring you a good wife also. It's not that he will only give you liberation, but he can also give you the things of the world. Like if it's a good wife you want, well then you're going to get it, he said. So then, of course, I think the Lord was a bit amused that when he's just, hundreds of years of tapas, and then eventually, instead of asking for liberation, he asked him for a good wife. So, but in the meantime, even before he could complete his thing, he found that Swayambhu Manu and his wife Shatarupa have come into the forest and jungle, to the ashram of Kardama Prajapati, bringing their beautiful daughter, Devahuti, their second youngest daughter, Devahuti, to the forest, and he says, and he offers him that side. He tells Kardama that here I have brought my beautiful daughter, and I would be happy if you married her. So Kardama said, see, I was right. I mean, even if I wanted a wife, it's a good thing I told Vishnu, because they see, he's a great manipulator. He manipulates everything from everywhere. So he already told Manu, and Manu has already reached here with his daughter, and Manu, of course, gives his daughter to Kardama, and but Kardama made one condition. He told Manu, look, I will marry your daughter, that's okay, but one thing is, once I give her a son, I will leave this place. No more will I have any relationship with her, and I will go back to my tapas, which I have disrupted because of my father's request to me to produce progeny. So Manu said, all right. So Devahuti was agreed, and she was brought all bejeweled and beautiful, like she was a princess, and lots of gold and this and that, all the Manu had brought for his dowry for his daughter. So then Devahuti had, instead of living in the silken and beautiful palace of her father, she entered into this humble ashram of her husband, Kardama Prajapati. And there it is said, she was a model wife. Instead of, they're saying, sometimes you find if a poor man marries a rich man's daughter, it's bound to be a failure, because this woman will never be able to adjust to this poor man's conditions, and she will always be saying, making little nasty little comments on how she was in her father's house and how little she has here. But Devahuti was a model wife. She served him faithfully and well for many, many years. And until she became totally in a poor condition, she was actually in that time, and she was in served him so faithfully that, and then suddenly one time Kardama Prajapati, for the first time after years and years, he suddenly looked at her, and then he realized that she looks a bit different from when she came here. What's the matter with her? Then he asked her, what is it? What's troubling you? What are you bothered about? Why are you looking so thin and wan, and in fact you look quite old. What happened to you? So, so he says, she says, my lord, you have promised that you will give me a son, and that is what I want. And she hung her head, of course, but then, modestly. So, Kadamba, I remember that I gave that promise to your father. So, okay. But he said, look, this is not the way. I mean, he himself, old grey beard and looking, quite usual jadadari as a sannyasi was. And she was also in a very pathetic condition. So he said, you do one thing. Go, there is a pond, a lake there called the Bindusaras. You could take a bath in that, he said. So first of all, you take a bath. So she went and dipped into that water, and when she came out, she was back into the beautiful, youth and beauty of her age. And there were so many maids and so on, she came out looking so beautiful. And of course, to please her, he also took a dip in that same lake. I wonder where that lake exists. We could all go take a dip. Now, so he also took a dip. And he also became a nice, handsome young man. And he said he will give her all his. What's happening over there? Oh, okay, that he will give her all her desires. And because of his great tapas, this is what I told you, these rishis, they were actually, they could control the elements, they could control, and they had anything at their wish, if they wanted. But they never wanted. They were quite satisfied and content with what they had. But in order to please her, he created a wonderful kind of moving palace which could go around. It was like an aeroplane, but it had all the conveniences of a palace. Like we have this palace on wheels and all, which goes across in Rajasthan. So then this was a palace here, and they went in, and he showed her all the different worlds and all the different sights, which would, usually that was their honeymoon after how many years of married life. So they went all over the world, and eventually they came back, and it is said they had many daughters. He gave her many daughters. 9 daughters. And then he said, I'm off. That's enough. I've given you more than enough. So, more than you asked for. So, let me go. So she said, but my lord, you have not given me a son. You promised me a son. And, please keep my promise. So he said, oh, okay. Then I shall do that, he said. And that we are going to take tomorrow. It is the avatar of Kapila. Kapilopyakhyanak will start tomorrow. The Lord himself takes his birth in her womb to keep up his promise that he would be born as her son. And the Lord himself takes birth in her womb as a great saint called Kapila, who is the founder of the Sankhya system of philosophy. Hinduism has 6 systems of philosophy. Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, and Vedanta, that is Uttara Vedanta, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. So these are the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy. And Kapila is the founder of the Sankhya philosophy. And tomorrow you will hear how he gives upadesh to his mother that of the different aspects of the Sankhya philosophy, which is very famous, and which is also, even Vedanta, even in the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, he touches on the Sankhya philosophy, which is not Advaita, but actually Dvaita, duality. Prakriti and Purusha both are exalted in the Sankhya philosophy. And that we will take tomorrow.